And welcome back. The Legal Aid Society recently released a new database that's allowing New Yorkers to look up the disciplinary records of police officers that they encounter. Now, the organization hopes to make accountability and transparency more accessible to the public, particularly to communities of color. Joining us now is the Supervising Attorney of the Legal Aid Society, Anthony Posada. And Anthony, thank you for joining us. And I'll start off with, why do you feel that this database is so important?
Thank you again, Daren, for having me. And you're right. We recently launched what is perhaps the most comprehensive database of police officer records, as well as records of Department of Correction officers, that will allow members of the public to check for disciplinary records, as well as records of payroll of officers that are patrolling their communities. And this is something that goes to the heart of being able to develop trust in the police, develop trust in the public servants who swore to protect people in their communities. And also, it does away with what was a norm for a very long time, where these records were shielded from the public eye. And so having this database is something that is going to be of service to the community, so that people can know and have a better understanding of the kinds of officers that are patrolling their streets.
So when we talk about officers patrolling the streets, obviously a lot of people do have encounters with police officers. Sometimes those encounters do not go the best way. And many times that interaction with the police officer may be the first of its kind, but for that officer, they may have multiple encounters with people that are worth noting about. Give us a little bit about this here, because for a person that has this on an individual encounter, to be able to uncover now that this person, this police officer, may have had multiple encounters and it was in a negative fashion, how does that bolster a person's case?
Well, that in itself is something that will help. Let's say if the person develops or finds themselves with a criminal case against them, resulting from that encounter. If they get a hold of these records, if their public defender gets these records and is able to see them, then that is going to be able to chip away at the credibility of the officer when it comes to their testimony in court, because it will show that there's a pattern of the behavior already in the person's past and in the officer's interactions with people. And so this will help the person in their primary case. But overall, if a person has an encounter, they deserve to know if this officer already has exhibited this kind of behavior that has resulted in disciplinary charges being filed against them, so that they can understand that this is not a first instance, it's not an isolated instance. It could be something that's already been happening in the career of this officer. And so it allows the person to see the paper trail of that history and have access to it. And so those are some of the different ways, Daren, that having this information at your fingertips can help with their primary case.
Give me a little bit about the numbers that you're seeing coming across your desk in terms of complaints. Are we seeing a rise in complaints by civilians when it comes to police?
Well, what I can tell you, Daren, is what the database includes. It combines more than 450,000 records. It has over 18,000 lawsuits filed against more than 14,000 NYPD officers in a time frame that encompasses 2013 up until June 30 of 2022, this year. It has 190,000 civilian complaint review board records of allegations made against NYPD officers, including more than 1,000 full investigation closing reports, roughly 9,000 NYPD internal misconduct records, including NYPD trial decisions, and NYPD Internal Affairs Bureau records, as well as 15,000 district attorney and judicial records that include what we refer to in criminal justice as Brady and Giglio disclosures from prosecutors and district attorney adverse credibility records from 4 New York City counties. So in that last part, Brady material is exculpatory material that the prosecutors have that must be provided to public defenders. And so it also has over 1,000 archived media articles concerning NYPD misconduct and hundreds of Department of Corrections staff discipline records. So it's not so much, Daren, that we're seeing a rise in people making these complaints or filing these complaints, but it's really about the thoroughness of the database and the way that brings together from all these multiple sources the informations that can start to give a person a clear understanding of the officers and their actual histories.
And so we talk about the Cop Accountability Project. I want to talk about that for a few moments because that's another component here. When we talk about the Cop Accountability Project, what exactly is that and what are your hopes?
And start telling you that the Law Enforcement Lookup tool, which is the name of the database that was released this week, LALU is the acronym. It is the result of a pilot project that started with a public database that was called CapStat. And that was started in 2018. And the idea behind it was in the years prior to the launching of this database, public defenders would have these records in spreadsheets, in notes that they would take of instances where officers were found to be not credible or where they would receive material about an officer's disciplinary records. But there wasn't a systematic way to access that information. It was spread out, it was held by different people. And so the CopStat database, the pilot project, was a way in which to start organizing and putting an infrastructure over that information and making it available in a digital format. Since then, the Cop Accountability Project has grown to be a project that assists members of the public if they find themselves in situations like the one we mentioned earlier, where somebody has an encounter with a police officer and they want to file a complaint, but they don't know how to, and they want to understand how they can preserve their rights in case they want to file a lawsuit against the city and that officer in the future. And so there's a current clinic that operates as a result of the Cop Accountability Project, as well as the project itself is involved in lawsuits that the Legal Aid Society currently has against the NYPD for instances where its officers violated people's rights. And one example I can give you of that, Daren, is a lawsuit we have against the city related to the way in which officers violated people's rights during the George Floyd protests in 2020. Many people there saw the violent images that were on social media of officers pushing people, injuring people, using police vehicles against them when they were peacefully protesting and engaging in tactics that were meant to really silence and deter people from exercising their right to protest. And so the Cop Accountability Project operates in those different spheres, in bringing forward litigation and working in coalitions to hold officers accountable and work towards reforms that will ensure that the way the laws are written are protecting people and making sure that the police are more accountable. And the LALU itself, the database, is a way of legitimizing these accountability systems because if there is a disciplinary process against an officer, if there is a civilian complaint review board complaint that was substantiated, this database now brings all of that information together so people can access it and see it, as opposed to it just remaining secret or hidden from the public eye.
What kind of response have you been getting since the database has been released and now people have access to this information? Obviously, this is something that people have been calling for a long period of time, but now to see it actually out and available, what's it been like?
There's been a very positive response from the public. A lot of the comments relate to how this is going to help with transparency, how having these records is something we should have been doing a long time ago. And there are people who criticize it, people who come to viewing it as a something that is actually meant to harm officers, but that's a clear misunderstanding, Darren, because again, the intent here is not to use this database in any way that puts people in jeopardy. It's really about these are documents that show a person's history. They're already going to be, they're made public. And so if you have nothing to hide, if you're doing what you were sworn and took an oath to do, then there's not really anything that's putting you in jeopardy here. So there have been those types of comments about it, but those are really in the minority.
Yeah. And what about law enforcement? I mean, obviously, I know they're not too happy with this. Have you got any kind of legal pushback here?
I'd have to check, Darren, although I wouldn't be surprised if there was a statement from the police officers union saying that, again, having these records is dangerous for officers or will prevent them from doing their job effectively, which is actually doesn't make really sense, because if officers are doing their job correctly, then they should have nothing to worry about in this database. And there obviously have been people who say things like, well, why not have everybody's criminal histories publicly available? But again, Darren, we're having a, a space for people to know about public servants, people who are in a different footing in terms of civilians, because, right, they are here to do their jobs as police officers.
So if a person wants to go about getting this database and they're just seeing this show for the very first time and they're hearing about this, what do they do?
So they can go to www.legal-aid.org/LELU, LELU. And that will take them directly to the website where they can find the database. Again, that's www.legal-aid.org/LELU. And that takes them directly to the database. And the way it was set up is that you can type in an officer's name and begin to search across all these different fields. And just the name itself is how people can find information, and not necessarily a badge number, because badge numbers, we have found out, change throughout an officer's career. And so the name itself is the identifier that follows the person's documents.
Well, Anthony, I want to thank you for taking the time to share with us today. And certainly, I know the public will definitely take advantage of this much needed resource here in the community. And we'll see where it goes from here. Anthony Posada, thank you very much for sharing with us.
Thank you very much for having me, Darren. And if people have any questions, they can get in contact with us and also reach out to us even through that website itself. And thank you again for having us and letting us talk about this important tool.
Absolutely. Anthony Posada, thank you for being with us. And that takes the time for this segment, but we want you to stay with us because guess what? The Social Justice Forum continues with another guest right after this.